So I've been lurking here for a while, but after what happened to me and my girlfriend last year, I have to share this. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar, because I still can't fully process what went down. My English isn't perfect, but I hope I can explain everything clearly. It all started when Sarah, my girlfriend, found this Airbnb in Springfield, Oregon. Sarah is a travel blogger, and she's always looking for those hidden gem places that look great in photos. This one was perfect. It was a beautiful Victorian-style house, a bit out of the way but still close to town. The photos looked amazing, like something straight out of a movie. The host, Mrs. Pemberton, seemed really friendly in her messages, super accommodating, and she even sent over a list of things to do around the area. It seemed like the perfect getaway. We arrived late afternoon. It was just before sunset, and the place looked just as good in real life as it did in the pictures. Mrs. Pemberton left the key under the mat with a note welcoming us and saying that if we needed anything, she lived nearby and could come over quickly. It was quaint, old, and had this rustic charm, like it had been around forever. Creaky floors, lots of old furniture, all that stuff. It felt cozy. The first night seemed fine. We unpacked, had dinner, and Sarah spent the evening editing photos while I watched some TV. We were both pretty tired, so we went to bed early, around 10 p.m. That's when things started to get weird. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. I wasn't sure what woke me at first, but then I heard it. This soft whispering sound, like someone was talking but far away. At first I thought maybe it was coming from outside, like wind or something. But then I realized it was coming from inside the house, specifically above us. The only problem was, we had checked the house earlier, and there was no attic. At least, none that we saw. I figured it was just the house settling, or maybe even a rat or something. I didn't want to freak Sarah out, so I just tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to Sarah while we were having breakfast. She laughed it off, saying it was probably nothing, just the wind or some old pipes creaking. But I could tell she was a little uneasy. We didn't really talk about it much after that, though. We spent the day exploring the area. There wasn't much to do, but we found a small diner nearby and had lunch. While we were eating, this old man sitting at the counter overheard us talking about the house. He asked where we were staying, and when we told him the address, 742 Evergreen Terrace, his face changed. He looked almost worried. "You staying there?" he asked, his voice low. "You be careful, that house, it's got a history." Sarah asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. "Not my place to say. But people don't stay long there. Things happen." I could see Sarah was a little rattled, but I didn't take it seriously. It's an old house in a small town, of course. There'd be ghost stories and rumors. We paid the bill and left. That night, though, things got weirder. We went to bed around the same time, but I woke up again, this time at 2 a.m. The whispering was louder now, and there were footsteps. Not outside, inside, directly above us, even though we had already checked and there wasn't an attic or another floor. "Mike, do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, sitting up in bed. "Yeah," I whispered back, my heart pounding. We both listened for a minute. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth, but there was no one else in the house. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Sarah was shaking. We got up and walked into the hallway. The sound stopped. The house was dead silent. No footsteps. No whispering. We checked every room, but nothing seemed out of place. It was eerie, but again, we convinced ourselves it was nothing. Maybe an animal in the walls or something. We were freaked out, but we tried to brush it off and go back to sleep. The next morning, though, we found something that made us question everything. In the kitchen, there were muddy footprints, human footprints. They started from the front door and stopped in the middle of the room, just disappearing. "What the hell, Mike?" Sarah whispered, staring at the floor. I had no explanation. The front door was locked when we went to bed, and it was still locked when we woke up. No one else had a key except Mrs. Pemberton. But why would she come in the middle of the night? And why would the footprints just stop? Sarah was visibly shaken. She wanted to leave, but we didn't have anywhere else to go. All the nearby hotels and Airbnbs were booked, and it was a long drive back home. We decided to stay one more night, but Sarah was already looking for places we could move to in the morning. That afternoon, Mrs. Pemberton showed up, unannounced. She knocked on the door, and when I opened it, she stood there with this weird smile. "Just wanted to check in, see how you two are doing," she said. Her voice was sweet, but something about her felt off. I don't know how to explain it, but she gave me this uneasy feeling. "We're fine, thanks," Sarah said, a little too quickly. I could tell she didn't want to talk to her. Mrs. Pemberton just stood there for a minute, looking around the house like she was inspecting it. Then she smiled again and said, "Well, if you need anything, I'm just a call away." And with that, she left. The whole encounter was weird. Sarah looked at me after she left and said, "Something's not right, Mike. I don't trust her." I didn't know what to say. Mrs. Pemberton seemed harmless enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I brushed it off, telling Sarah we'd be out of there soon and everything would be fine. Later that evening, Sarah started doing some digging online. She wanted to see if there was any truth to what the old man in the diner said about the house having a history. It didn't take long for her to find something. The house had been owned by the Pemberton family for generations, but the original owner, Mrs. Pemberton's great-grandmother, died in the house under mysterious circumstances. She was found dead in the attic, though no one could explain how she got there. The official story was that it was an accident, but there were rumors that she had been involved in some kind of dark ritual, something to do with the occult. That night, everything went to hell. We were lying in bed, trying to sleep, but neither of us could relax. Every creak in the house felt like a threat. Around midnight, we heard a loud bang from upstairs. Sarah screamed. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight again. The attic door, the one we couldn't find before, was wide open. I don't know how it opened, but it was there, right in front of us. A cold draft blew down from the opening, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Sarah was clinging to my arm, crying. "Mike, we need to get out of here, now," she said, her voice shaking. I nodded. We grabbed our stuff and bolted for the front door. But when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It felt like the door was glued shut, like something was holding it in place. "Mike!" Sarah screamed, pointing to the window. I looked up and saw her, Mrs. Pemberton, standing outside in the dark, staring at us. But it wasn't the Mrs. Pemberton we had met earlier. Her face was twisted, decayed almost, rotten. Her eyes were sunken, her skin hanging loosely off her bones. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away from the door. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate, coming down the stairs. Sarah and I turned around, and there she was, Mrs. Pemberton, or whatever was pretending to be her. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You're not leaving," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "You're mine now." I don't remember much after that. Everything went dark, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the side of the road, miles away from the house. My clothes were torn, and I was covered in dirt and scratches. Sarah was gone. No one believed me when I told them what happened. The police said there were no signs of foul play, no evidence of anything strange at the house. They didn't even find the attic door we saw that night. The official report said Sarah was missing, probably ran off or got lost in the woods. But I know the truth. She didn't run. She didn't get lost. She was taken. I've been staying with friends since that night, too afraid to go back to my own place. I keep seeing Mrs. Pemberton's twisted face in my nightmares, and sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can hear Sarah's voice whispering my name. I don't know if I'll ever find her, but I can't stop looking. I won't stop until I uncover the truth about what happened at 742 Evergreen Terrace.
Hi, I don't know if this is the right place to post this, but after what I experienced last year, I really need to talk about it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened, and it's hard because people don't believe me. But I swear, every word I'm about to say is true. This all started in New Orleans. My wife, Jessica, and I, along with our kids, Ethan and Lily, decided to take a family trip. It was meant to be a nice break from the craziness of work and school, so we thought Airbnb would be a great option. We found this beautiful property on 221 Baker Street, an old Victorian house owned by a woman named Allison. It had a perfect 5-star rating. The reviews were full of praise. People talked about how clean, charming, and well-maintained the house was, and how accommodating Allison was as a host. Honestly, it seemed too good to be true. We booked the place for a week. Everything seemed fine at first. Allison wasn't there when we checked in, but she left detailed instructions and a little welcome basket, which was a nice touch. The house itself was gorgeous, big windows, elegant furniture, and a lovely garden out back. But from the moment we arrived, something didn't feel right. It started with small things. The place was immaculate, but in a way that felt unnatural. You know how some homes feel lived in with a few quirks here and there? This one didn't. It was like no one had ever actually stayed there. The air felt heavy too, like the house was holding its breath. Jessica noticed it too, but we didn't want to make a big deal out of it. We were here to relax. The first night was fine. We had dinner, played some board games with the kids, and went to bed early. But the next morning, things started to go downhill. Jessica found hair in the bathroom sink, and it wasn't hers or Lily's. Then when I went to make coffee, the machine was filled with mold. Not the kind that happens after a few days of neglect. This was old, black mold, like the machine hadn't been cleaned in months. Jessica was pissed, and to be honest, I was too. This wasn't what we expected from a place with a perfect 5-star rating. I sent a polite message to Allison, explaining what we found. She responded almost immediately, apologizing profusely and saying that she'd send someone to take care of it. That was fine with us. We didn't want to ruin the trip over a few minor issues. But then things got worse. That afternoon, Ethan came running into the kitchen, holding something in his hand. It was a rusty nail. He said he found it sticking out of one of the floorboards in his room. When I went to check, I found a few more nails, all sharp and exposed. At that point, Jessica was done. She wanted to leave. I told her we'd figure it out, but first we needed to write an honest review. I didn't want to go full-on rage mode, but I couldn't stay quiet either. We were paying good money for a supposedly top-rated place, and it was turning into a nightmare. So I wrote the review, polite but honest. I mentioned the hair, the mold, and the nails. I didn't attack Allison directly, but I made it clear that there were some serious issues that needed addressing. The next morning, I got a message from Allison. I figured it would be another apology, maybe a refund offer, but it wasn't. The tone was different. cold, almost threatening. She said something like, "I see you left a review. I'd appreciate it if you'd reconsider." I showed it to Jessica, and we both felt uneasy. There was something about it that just felt off. We left the house that day to do some sightseeing, trying to forget about the weirdness. But when we got back, something had changed. The air in the house felt heavier, almost suffocating. It was like the walls were closing in. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but I couldn't help feeling like we were being watched. Then, that night, things escalated. We were sitting in the living room watching a movie when we heard a loud thud upstairs. Ethan and Lily were already asleep, so I went to check it out. I thought maybe something had fallen, but when I got to the top of the stairs, everything was normal. Nothing was out of place. But as I was about to head back down, I noticed something strange. There was a small crack in the wall at the end of the hallway that I hadn't seen before, and the longer I stared at it, the more I realized it wasn't just a crack. It looked like it had been forced open, like someone had pried it apart. I called Jessica upstairs, and when she saw it, her face went pale. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding. "But I'm starting to think we need to get out of here." We decided to leave the next morning. We couldn't stay there another night, not with everything that had been happening. But that's when the real nightmare began. As we were packing up, I got another message from Allison. This one was different. It wasn't just a request to reconsider the review, it was full of personal details about us. She mentioned where we'd been that day, what we'd eaten for dinner, even what time Ethan went to bed. I hadn't told her any of this. There was no way she could know. I showed the message to Jessica, and we both felt this cold dread wash over us. Allison was watching us. She had to be. But how? The house didn't have any cameras that we could see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow always there, lurking in the shadows. We left the house in a hurry and checked into a hotel downtown. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The messages didn't stop. Allison kept sending them, getting more and more unhinged. She talked about how much she loved her Airbnb business, how she couldn't let anyone ruin it. And then she said something that still gives me chills to this day. "You can't run from me. I know where you're staying." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, pacing the room, checking the locks on the door every few minutes. Jessica tried to calm me down, but I knew something was wrong. Allison wasn't just upset about the review, she was obsessed. And somehow she had found us. The next day I went to the police. They took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. They said it was a civil matter and suggested we block her number. I tried explaining that this wasn't just a bad host situation, this woman was stalking us, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. Meanwhile, the messages kept coming. They were more cryptic now, filled with threats about how she would make sure we paid for what we did. I didn't know what to do. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race. Then, 2 days later, I found out the truth. I was sitting in the hotel lobby trying to get some work done when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Miller?" a voice said on the other end. "Yes, who is this?" "It's Carlos. I'm Allison's partner." My blood ran cold. Partner? I had no idea Allison had a partner. I'd never seen his name mentioned anywhere, not in the Airbnb listing, not in the reviews. But before I could say anything, he continued. "I need to talk to you about Allison," he said. "She's not W well." Carlos went on to explain that Allison had been obsessed with maintaining her perfect 5-star rating for years. Every little criticism, every minor complaint drove her mad. And when we left that review, it sent her over the edge. She had been stalking us using her network of Airbnb properties to track our movements, but what shocked me the most was when Carlos admitted that he was the one who left the bad review under a fake account. "I wanted to test her," he said, his voice filled with regret. I needed to know if she would let it go, but she didn't. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The whole time, Allison wasn't reacting to us. She was reacting to Carlos. He had pushed her over the edge and we were caught in the middle. "We'd been watching you," Carlos said. "Every move you've made, she's seen it. I'm so sorry, but you need to get out of New Orleans now." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Jessica saw the look on my face and asked what was wrong. I didn't know how to tell her. I didn't know how to explain that we were pawns in some twisted game between Allison and her partner. We packed our bags and left that afternoon. We didn't tell anyone where we were going, not even our families. We just disappeared. It's been months now, and I still feel like we're being watched. We've moved twice since then, but every now and then I get this feeling like Allison is still out there, waiting. And Carlos. I don't know if he's still with her, or if he's hiding from her now too. All I know is that after that phone call, everything about our lives has changed. We didn't stay in New Orleans after Carlos's warning. We left the city that same day. I didn't even check out of the hotel. I just couldn't stand being in one place for too long. I don't know how, but I could feel her, Allison, getting closer. I don't mean physically either. It was like she was invading my mind. The constant messages, the threats, the fact that she somehow knew everything about us. Even after we thought we'd gotten away, it was like she was everywhere, watching, controlling our lives from the shadows. Jessica didn't understand at first. She thought maybe it was all a big misunderstanding or that Carlos was just trying to mess with us, but I knew better. Allison wasn't just some obsessive Airbnb host anymore. She had become something darker, more dangerous. And Carlos's admission that he had triggered her breakdown, that didn't help. If anything, it made me realize just how far she was willing to go. We tried to move on, to start fresh. We didn't tell anyone where we were going after we left New Orleans. We used cash for everything. No credit cards, no cell phones, no email, nothing. I felt like I was in a movie, like we were running from the FBI or something. But this was real life, and Allison was hunting us. 2 weeks after we left New Orleans, I started getting the messages again. At first, it was just 1 or 2 from an unknown number. They didn't say much, just things like, "I see you," or "You can't hide forever," but then they started to get more specific. "Nice new car," one said, even though we'd just bought a used SUV from a dealership miles away from New Orleans. "Lily's getting so big," another one said. "That one sent chills down my spine." She knew about our daughter. She was still watching us somehow. But how? We hadn't posted anything online. We hadn't told anyone where we were. I blocked the number, but that didn't stop the messages. They just kept coming from different numbers, different accounts. And the more they came, the more desperate I felt. We moved, again, this time to a small town in Texas, hoping to finally get away. But it didn't matter. Allison was always one step ahead. It was like she had this network of eyes everywhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that every person we passed on the street, every car parked outside our house, every noise I heard at night was connected to her, watching, waiting. Then one night, everything came crashing down. We had just put the kids to bed when Jessica came into the living room, her face pale. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "I think there's someone outside." I froze. "What do you mean?" "I saw someone in the backyard, just standing there, by the tree." My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and crept towards the back door. Sure enough, As I peered out the window, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing just beyond the tree line. My blood ran cold. "Alison," I whispered. I was about to open the door and confront her when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down and saw a message from another unknown number. "You're too late." Before I could even react, the back door swung open and the figure stepped inside. But it wasn't Alison, it was Carlos. He looked disheveled, desperate, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were wild, darting around the room like he was afraid of something or someone. "You have to help me," he said, his voice low and panicked. "She's after me now." I tried to stop her, but I can't. She's gone too far. I didn't know what to say. The man who had set this whole thing in motion was now standing in my house, begging for help. But before I could ask him what was going on, there was another knock at the door. Jessica screamed, and I turned to see Alison standing there, her face twisted into a crazed smile. "Hello, Mike," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I told you, you can't run from me." I don't remember much after that. Everything happened so fast. Carlos lunged at Alison, trying to stop her from coming inside, but she was too quick. She pushed past him and came straight for me. I tried to fight her off, but she was stronger than I expected. The last thing I remember is her laughing, this horrible, high-pitched cackle, as everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Jessica and the kids were safe, but Carlos was gone. That Alison had disappeared too, leaving nothing behind but the chaos she'd created. The police said they had no leads, no idea where she'd gone, but I knew better. She's still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know if she'll ever come back, but I can feel her presence like a dark cloud hanging over my life. I don't think we'll ever truly be free from her. And every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice whispering in the back of my mind, "You can't run from me." So, if you ever find yourself looking for a place to stay and you come across a perfect 5-star Airbnb listing, be careful. You never know who might be watching or waiting. And whatever you do, don't leave a bad review.